What's up, you guys? My name is Keelan Archie, and today we are going to take a Old Testament overview, okay? This is going to be our presentation on the Old Testament. Now, I know what you're thinking. Keelan, wait, whoa, hold on, man. The Old Testament? Have you read it? I mean, there's all these rules and regulations and crazy stories and talking donkeys and somebody gets eaten by a fish. It's just a lot. Why would we ever read it? Now, hey, I want to encourage you. Calm down, okay? There's no need to fear. Here's some things that are going to help us keep track as we go over this overview, okay? Number one, the Old Testament is a major part of God's revelation of himself to humanity, okay? What that means is that even if stuff gets confusing, we can rely on the fact that God is still good, he's still in control, and that he still is actually looking to be understood by us, and that's okay. Okay, the Old Testament is still useful for teaching and instruction. Even today, even being in the New Covenant, the Old Testament is useful for teaching and instruction, okay? It is absolutely relevant to the Christian today. Now, I've decided to help you in today's study. We're going to break down the Old Testament into three main sections, okay? There's 39 books, and that can be a little daunting at first. So we're going to break it down into just three main sections. Our first section is going to be Genesis to Esther, okay? This is going to be the story of God and his people. Then we're going to do Job to Songs of Solomon. This is going to be the writing of God's people and how they felt during this specific time period. And then there's going to be Isaiah to Malachi, okay? This is going to be God's message to his people during this time period. So let's jump in to the first one. Genesis to Esther, okay? This is the story of God and his people. We start off in Genesis with the creation of man, okay? Everything's going good for the first two chapters. And then, there's the fall of man, there's the fall from the garden. We have man's judgment with things like the Tower of Babel and with the flood that happens in Genesis 6. But we also have the redemption plan that starts through Abram in Genesis 12. Okay, and this starts the overall picture of the entire Bible, of God redeeming man to himself. Abraham's descendants would eventually end up in slavery in Egypt, and we would get the deliverance of these people, which is what we call the book of Exodus. And then we also get the beginning of the new covenant, right, in Mount Sinai, and the conquest into the land that was promised to Abram in Genesis. That is what Deuteronomy and Joshua would be. Now we step into Judges, right? And Judges are going to walk us through a 200-year period of where the people of Israel are ruled by judges. After a while, you get a transition in Samuel, where Samuel is the last judge and anoints the first king. We go from judges to kings. In the kings, we get Saul, then we get David and Solomon. And then after Solomon, his two sons actually end up splitting the kingdom. And then we get what we've come to know as the Babylon exile. So we get from judges, kings to kingdoms to exile, the return from exile, which is in Nehemiah. And then we get the awaited glory. So this period of what is to come. So that is the time period that we're going to be covering, or that the Old Testament covers in its study. Now, the next one is Job to Songs of Solomon. These are going to be the writing of God's people. This gives us insight into what the people of God were feeling and thinking during this time, okay? Now, this is important because we find key characteristics of God that is emphasized through these books and through these writings. They are prophetic, poetic, and practical portrayals of God's dealing with people and his sovereign character. Up next, we get Isaiah to Malachi. These are God's messengers to people. There are prophets. Now, we break them up into major prophets or minor prophets, but none of these prophets carried minor messages. They all had something to say specifically to God's people, whether in exile or coming back from exile. And most of them often would include things of, hey, you've been sinning. God's going to judge that. Or it would be messages of restoration, that the awaited glory of Israel is going to come, which we see all throughout those books. Now, what this shows us is God's seriousness about sin, that even his chosen people need to be weary about the consequences of it, and his commitment to compassion, that there was no sin so great that the Lord did not choose to redeem and to pull them back into his presence and into a covenant relationship with him. Now, let me tell you why this is important. The Old Testament overall is important because it gives us the clarity and the significance of the New Testament. When you begin to read the stories of people who have walked with God but could not be that Messiah that was needed, then when you get to Jesus in Matthew, you realize that he truly is the one who we have been waiting and the one who could deliver us from the sin that we see all the way back in Genesis 3. Now, it also offers insight into the full character of God, right? How are we going to call him justice and mercy if we have no examples of him actually choosing justice rather than mercy? Now that we have a clear picture of who God is overall, we can see, oh, you really are grace, and truth. And then it invites us to participate into a fulfilling large story of the Bible. That story being that God really does love his people and is actively redeeming the entire world through the person of Jesus Christ. Have a blessed day.